when it comes to enmeshment and how it affects people, it all comes down to the level of extremity, the gender, and exposure. Enmeshment is one of the most interesting things I learned about in therapy class. And it's a hard thing to accept about your home life. When your biological family or your surrogate family, foster family does not introduce, maintain, and fight for boundaries that are healthy and promote autonomy and development, it can be extremely hard to grow into a full functioning adult. And it's a combination of what the parents' needs and the kids' needs. The kids' needs take a back seat or are completely denied or partially denied. In my opinion, did my parents control every aspect of my life? I would say 95% yes. They did not imprison me. They didn't cause physical harm. But they used their religion, their philosophy, their beliefs, their social conditioning, and gender role expectations to keep me in a prison of my own mind. So when I turned 18, it wasn't them keeping me there. It was me believing I could not leave because I would risk my soul or my future leaving. And this is why it's so hard when there's no boundaries in adult to kid or adult to adult relationships. It's something you have to be taught by adults or something you have to learn to do for yourself. And it's very similar to the Stockholm Syndrome, even though that's a pop culture reference. It's so true. When you're taught that there's only one way to believe, one way to live, one way to be a woman, any deviation from that, you're not accepted. It's hard to accept that the people who acted as though they knew what they were doing, that they were the religious authority, did not know what they were doing. And enmeshment trauma can be very traumatizing because when you don't know that you could say no and that no should be respected, there's a blurring of boundaries and accountability. The goal of enmeshment is to create emotional control and power within a family. It can become traumatic when adults are exposed or expose children to inappropriate situations or emotions. Family identity mixes or supersedes your own identity and rewrites what you should prioritize. A good example, putting your mom first before your wife or kid, or putting parents' wishes before your personal goals, regardless of your age, can be examples of enmeshment. Family first, individual second is a very good tagline for enmeshment trauma. The trauma part of enmeshment does refer to long-term effects on individuality and autonomy. The bad feelings you start to feel when you break away is how people maintain control. Children in enmeshed families think and feel that they are responsible for their parents' self-esteem and emotional stability. Some people refer to it as parentification, in which children are in caretaking roles towards sad, depressed, or grieving adults. So, enmeshment is very hard for people. Very, very hard for people. When your personality, your beliefs, the way you live your life, no fault of your own, is different enough or is so polarizingly different that it causes an emotional, a physical, or a familial fracture within a family. If you're a straight cis man married to a woman who believes in God but doesn't go to church, is not going to be a very big threat to enmeshment in a religious Christian family, because there's really not much difference. But if you're a gay, a trans, an atheist, there is going to be a fallout of some kind when you're dealing with enmeshment in religious families. I don't know how there couldn't be. I'm sure if you get lucky and blessed to have parents that don't allow the enmeshment to continue, that could be a more positive experience. But it's so exhausting. My family would guilt me when I came out. You're upsetting your mother. My response is, and it will remain so, well, if people in my family did not expect me to be someone I'm not, force me to be that, never ever ask me after I was 18, is that who I even am, and make me uncomfortable not to be, make me uncomfortable to be anything that I'm not, it makes me uncomfortable. My family is not open or amenable to anything that isn't a cookie-cutter version of themselves. I'm not kidding. I had interests for years that my parents would have probably lost their minds over. I grew up in a house that didn't like Harry Potter. I mean, my mother viewed Harry Potter as some people would view the Turner Diaries. If you don't know what the Turner Diaries are, it's basically the Bible for white supremacists to do anarchy. Think of the Oklahoma City bombing, and you'd be about right. That's how my mother viewed Harry Potter. A book series that made kids want to read and got them excited about fantasy. My mother viewed that as the book of the devil. And I'm not using hyperbole. She actually said that. If I don't vote the way my family does, my mother says I should be deported. Even though my family has lived here for centuries. If I don't vote the way they want to, if I dare to not vote at all, my family takes it so personally. This is the kind of enmeshment I'm talking about. And I've not lived at home since I was 24. Since 2018, I'm coming up on 8 years come August. I can still hear my parents in my head. It's it's very similar to being in your own mother's womb, even though you're 32 years old. It is so creepy. And my sister says, that's how it's supposed to be. And I said, no, it's not. Once you turn 18, your parents should make no decisions for you unless they have a notarized court document saying they can. Just because you live in your parents' spare room, they should not get to choose what friends you have, where you work, what car you drive, where you drive your car, what your identity is, what church you go to. Once you're 18, your parents should not control you at all. Your parents can set a few rules, like when you can come home and please keep illegal, illicit substances out of our house, but they can't make you do those things. They can say, this is what we expect. If you can't follow those rules, similar to a lease, you have 30 days to move out. That's fine, as long as they don't try to control your behavior. They just set expectations. That's how parents and adults are supposed to act toward each other. Not in this family. They will go through your room, tear it apart when you're in your 20s, because they think you have a PG movie. explicit pictures that are illegal. A PG movie. My family is fucking weird. Fucking weird. And there is nothing anybody can say that will change my mind. Healthy people do not want to control every aspect of their 20-something's life. It is freaking weird. I remember in my 20s bringing home several movies or shows just to watch something that isn't Christian. And my parents acted like I had gotten a surgery or something. That was how they phrased it. Utter ridiculousness. They would sit me down at the kitchen table and talk about how I was going to hell for watching a show like Dexter. Something that's completely legal, popular, fun, and interesting. I was 22 years old. I had a job. They had a problem with it because it didn't fit their moral guidelines. They acted as though I had committed a felony for watching a show from a library. If you live in a home where you have to hide who you are because your parents would lose their freaking minds for you watching a simple show, this is probably enmeshment. This is not normal. This is not okay. As long as you're not doing something illegal or something crazy, your parents should not react that way when you are 22 years old. If you have to hide everything about yourself because you're different than what your parents want you to be, this is not healthy behavior. Not healthy at all. And when you dare to be different or watch a simple Disney movie, because my parents villainized Disney. Disney was like, if you went on and watched The Dark Net, that's how they treated Disney, because it had magic in it. If you're more worried about magic in a cute animated film than you are about children being exploited, bombed, or blown up in another part of the country, you have problems. And there are different kinds of enmeshment traumas. I mean, if you Google or go on Reddit, you can go down that rabbit hole. But my parents' form of enmeshment was everyone conforming to the same behavior. If two of my siblings were doing music, I felt deep compulsions to do it too. It went so far into conformity, I actually faked needing glasses to be like everyone in my family. I dressed the way everyone in my family dressed, and I had to have a certain length of hair because the more hair you have on your head, the more godly and pure you are. It really does sound like 19 kids and counting. It's gross. And virginity, we've never talked about sex. Never. The only times I ever found out sex even existed was when my mother would bring home films from the library and would make a big deal how the movie was smut and the devil because somebody dared not to wear a shirt or someone was doing adult consensual sexual behavior. If you've grown up in Christianity, you probably are aware that there is no difference between promiscuous sex and consensual sex. They put every sexual activity that is not in a heterosexual marriage relationship as all of the same. Think about that. You can have, and I'm don't even believe in promiscuity because I don't believe marriage is something everyone is going for. Marriage and sex is not legitimate just because you're married. Sex isn't right, good, and decent because you're married. It's good because everyone consents, wants it, and they're happy about it. And if that only happens in a room full of people, between two people who aren't married, so be it. And if it happens between married people, that's fine too. But when you grow up in an environment where everything has to be exactly the way they say it is, and they do more than villainize anything that isn't that opinion. They equate it as worse than being a predator. Like evil, downright evil, satanic, if it's not their opinion. Which is funny because their opinion changed at least 4 times in my life. They switched into 3 denominations. They stopped believing that Disney was evil, and then they allowed more mainstream movies. You cannot say that something with authority, which they don't have, but they thought they had. You cannot say that something is right, change your mind 8 years later, and expect to be taken seriously that now this is the only right way to live. After the 3rd switch, I decided they were full of bullshit. You can change your mind. There's nothing wrong with that. The big problem is when you frame it as though you have a message from God and that anything that isn't your extreme form of religion and Christianity isn't this little tiny thing. If you're not a part of it, you're probably going to hell and that you're deceived, and then you change your mind 3 different times and have a very different opinion. You just destroyed your ability to be taken seriously. You've destroyed the ability for people to think you have God's ear. You can't say something 3 times, change your mind, say something else, and expect people to think you're infallible. I mean, there are people out there that still believe Jim Jones knew what he was talking about, but good Lord, there was no room for disagreements or just friendly banter about a difference in theology. You either believe this or shut up and get right with God. I'm not kidding. They actually said that. It's like, what is such importance that you have to do that? I mean, there was only one way to go to heaven. They worship marriage like it was an orientation. I'm not kidding. They do. They still do. They believe that the only legitimate way to explore sexuality is when you're married. They think that there is a magic switch going from all sex is bad, evil, and wrong before marriage to flipping a switch that everything except adultery and swapping, everything else is fine. The human body doesn't work like that. You cannot view something as a vice and just flip a switch. I mean, there are people out there that could probably try and do that, but for most women, it just doesn't come that easily for them. It is traumatic. It doesn't have to be, but it can be very traumatic for children who are not like their parents, who are different, who have very different views of the world. They leave their family's religion. They may have a completely different viewpoint or stance on orientation, sexuality, and the way they want to live their life. They could be an atheist, an agnostic. They could be on the other side of that religion. It is traumatizing to grow up in a family where you're not allowed to have a difference of opinion. When you realize there's no heaven, no hell, there's no God, and everything was created by a man who wants to control everybody. That's what religion is. Religion was made by men, usually white men, but not all the time. It was usually a white man who created a system to benefit their own privilege. That's what Christianity is. It was created by men of privilege to benefit themselves, socially, morally, agriculturally, sexually. It's always about profit in some way. That's why religion is popular. Because it makes bad people look like decent people. And I'm not saying that everyone in religion is a bad person. I'm saying you're either a bad person or you're upholding a system, an institution that creates bad people. There is no third option. And it's funny when people call me a godless atheist. Less than 1% of inmates in prison are godless atheists. 67%, 2 out of 3 people in American penal places, in prison, 2 out of 3 of them believe in the God of the Bible, while less than 1% of people in prison are godless atheists. You cannot call me a godless atheist with those statistics with a straight face. You shouldn't. My family does not believe in atheism. And when I say they don't believe in atheism, they don't believe atheists exist. It's the same thing as believing pixies don't exist, fairies don't exist, and Pennywise doesn't exist. They believe atheism is a figment of being an idiot, a fool. They actually believe that fools believe there is no God. My family won't talk about my atheism because they don't believe it exists. They think I'm a idiot who believes in things that aren't true. The people who believe in Noah's Ark and that a bush was on fire is calling me an atheist who believes in critical thinking a crazy person. That doesn't make sense at all. And it doesn't have to, because religion does not make sense unless you know that religion is all about control, power, influence. Once Pandora's box is opened, you can't shut it. When you realize that religion is all about making bad people feel good, and that if you're not a bad person, you're upholding a bad system, you can't unsee it. Once you know that, once you know a movie's twist, you can't unlearn it. It's just sitting there. But this is what enmeshment does. Enmeshment is an internalized system that if somebody can't control what you do, what you think, what you believe, and where you go, they will get inside your head so you do it to yourself. That is why, even 8 years later, I can still hear my parents telling me what to watch, what to do, what not to do. And every day, I'm a LGBTQIA ally. I can hear my parents in my head calling gay people a disease. My own family have said multiple times that gay people deserve AIDS because of the way they live. Do you know how hard it is to go from that kind of belief system, going from being a homophobe to actually enjoying being around gay people? Not because they're gay, but because they're interesting human beings who just happen to be gay. It's not something I overlook. It's not something I make an exception for. I don't think about it anymore at all. I'm not friends with people because they're gay any more than I'm friends with someone because they're a woman. I'm friends with people that are interesting, complex, similar interests, or somebody that pushes me to rethink everything about myself in a positive way. Now, that's the difference between me and my family. My family doesn't want to have their belief system tested, reaffirmed, or threatened in any way. That's why they won't talk about my atheism. They can't. They do not have the emotional capability to have a conversation about what's right about being different. It's all about, well, you're not what we are, so we can't talk about it, and in turn, you can't talk about it. My own sister told me this morning, well, why can't you be an atheist a little bit quieter than you are? And I said, no one in my family has ever been a quiet Christian a day in their life. Because that is their entire personality. That's not to say that's everything my family is, but that is their personality. And if you've met certain kinds of Christians or specific religious people that is their personality, you know what I'm talking about. You can have interests, you can have friends, but when your God is your only facet of your personality, that's what you talk about 98% of the time. And every time I talk about my atheism, these Christians bring it around to their God somehow, even if it's not critically conceivable, they will find a way. Because that is who they are. And if I tell them I don't believe there's a God, the next thing that comes out of their mouth, well, when you die, you'll find out the truth. That's not a loving thing to say. That's a microaggression. If somebody really loves you, cares about you, or even sees you as an equal human being, they would never say that. Just because somebody is a Christian, I don't tell them, well, when you die, you're going to find out there's no God because you'll be laying in a box. I don't say that. I've never said that. I've never even been tempted to say that. Who would say that? A rude, self-righteous Christian, probably. I've never met a Muslim that does that. Even though I see religion as an egregious offense against humanity, I've never heard anyone but a Christian say, well, when you die, you'll know. That's not something you say to someone you respect, somebody you see as an equal, or somebody worthy of being alive. That's what you tell somebody when you've given up trying to convince them of something and you have to have the last word. That's the behaviors a 10-year-old or even a 5-year-old shows. Well, since I can't have the toy, you can't have it either. That's the response a lot of Christians have given me. That's why I will always say the kindest, most welcoming, understanding, compassionate people are atheists, humanists. That's a fact. And that's not just me saying it. I've gone on Reddit to see if I'm just the only atheist that feels this way. I am not. And the more you adhere to an extremist form of Christianity, the more likely you will use microaggressions like, well, you'll find out when you die. That's not something you say to somebody you care about. And if you're saying it because you think you care about somebody, you need to be in therapy. Because that's not what you say to somebody you respect. Even a debate, when people debate, you're supposed to have more kindness and caring than that. But they can't. They don't, because they don't know what to do. So, what can we do about it? There's nothing you can do. And the whole point of enmeshment is control. And it's not always an insidious type of control. It can be simply fear of the unknown. This is how we've always done it. So anything besides that is something they view as a threat, something that makes them uncomfortable. It's basically the same reasons people are racist. Sometimes it's they don't know any better, they're ignorant, they're confused, they're scared. This is the way we've done it for so long. They don't know how to age out of their issues. And yeah, it can be insidious. It can be just downright control. And when you're these forms of extreme Christianity, it's very patriarchal. It's very man-centered. They use male authority and male leadership and male roles as an extra layer of power imbalances. When you're told from the cradle that your parents are God's representatives on earth, that a invisible being who's omnipresent and omniscient, who's destroyed nations and caused world floods, set your parents as the official leaders of your life, very few people, regardless of your background, will probably fight against it. At least not until you become a teenager. Every time I would do something that was extremely mild, but an active teenage rebellion, which is completely normal. I didn't do anything wrong. Like, when I say wrong, I mean I never took illicit substances, I never smoked, drank, never had sex. And I'm not saying having premarital sex is wrong. I'm saying according to their rules, their Bible, I never did anything besides maybe cheat on a test or ride without a helmet. You know, things that don't even register on terrible things teens could do. Teens could be out robbing cars, shooting people, school shootings. Stealing an eraser is not is not a bad thing compared to how my parents reacted. Watching Dexter is not something I made up. They made it sound like I was going to hell because I dared to have a desire to watch something they didn't want me to see. I was 22 years old. I didn't need their permission. Just because you live in someone's house does not mean they have a right to control what you do. It should look similar to a landlord lease situation. They sit down, they iron out expectations of residency, and if you can't keep those, there's a 30 days. That's not controlling people's behavior. That's setting an expectation. It's up to the 18-plus-year-old if they're going to keep the rules or not. Your parents should not be disciplining you anymore. You're an adult. The discipline shouldn't exist. The only thing that could resemble a discipline is having to move out because you can't keep the rules that you've agreed to. And the rules should not be excessive. I mean, good rules can be, we don't want any illegal substances like drugs, paraphernalia. They could say, please don't bring any of your dates home or hookups. That would be fine. Personally, if my child was living at home, I would want them to be comfortable enough to bring home somebody. I would rather they were in my house doing it than somewhere else that could be dangerous. But that's not how my parents saw it. And your parents should not set rules to control your behavior as an adult. The rules should be in place that you agree to consensually and with autonomy, that the only discipline there should be is that you move out. That's it. You have to keep some rules similar to a lease to stay here. They should not be disciplining you, taking away your tablet when you're over the age of 17. They have no right to take things you own. You're an adult. And everyone needs to start acting like an adult. If you can't act like an adult, keep the rules of the lease in which you live here, you need to move out. There should be no punishments going on. If you're not calling the police or telling them to move out in 30 days, that's really the only time you should be having telling you what you can and can't watch, where you go, where you work, who you date, what you love, what your interests are. That's not their place. And yet my parents did it for 6 years. I'm not kidding. 6 years. They told me what movies I could watch on things I owned. This is enmeshment. This is such a boundary violation of autonomy and adult rights and privileges. It is insurmountable. What kind of bullshit? My parents, still to this day, and all my siblings will defend it like a dog. You would not believe the lack of boundaries that existed in my home, my parents' home. And you cannot talk bad about my parents because that goes against our religion. And as I've always said, and I told my sister earlier today when we were having a talk about this, if you cannot safely critique and hold authority accountable, that is a dangerous, potentially abusive, violent environment. It's basically living in Trump's America. If people cannot be held responsible for their behavior, they are a potential abuser. If you can't talk badly about your parents because they did bad things or hurt you, that is abusive coercion and control. And you cannot talk bad about my parents. My sister will not listen. She does not want to hear anything bad about them because she's been programmed to not see anything bad. And if she does, she can't talk about it. And this goes on. I didn't even know what enmeshment was before today. I had to Google it because I didn't even know what the word was. And I just put in the symptoms, the behavior, all of the above in Googling and made sure it's a medically viewed way of looking at toxic, dysfunctional situations. And enmeshment is a real thing. It's not healthy for there to be one official view of the family and one way everyone looks at things. But it goes back. It really does go back all the way to the Bible. When my parents would talk about how this family believes this, our family does that, they really did quote that verse from Judges or Joshua, I can't remember. Me and my house serve the Lord. One person says it and everyone gets in line. That's just the way a lot of families in religion or even secular families are. And when it comes down to it, I didn't vote in the 2016 election or the 2020 election because I wanted some autonomy. I didn't vote because I was never allowed not to vote. So I went 14 years without voting to gain some autonomy. My father tried to force me to go to the polls and vote. And I said, I'm not going. And he said, well, it's un-American. And I said, well, fuck that. You're not less of an American because you don't vote. You're not less of an American because you can't vote, because you're a convicted felon. Which, ironically, in 2016, that was who was on the ballot. You're not less because you don't do something, and you're not less because you do something. If you're not passionate about voting, or you find a different way to show your point of view, fine. You don't have to vote. And unlike my parents, just because you don't vote doesn't mean you can't complain about the problems. My parents believed if you didn't vote, representation still complain. You don't have to have any reason to complain besides wanting to make whatever place you're in a better place. Once I get settled in long-term housing, I plan on registering to vote because we need every vote we can to veto as many potential legislations against queer people, trans people. We need to get rid of as many laws or upcoming legislation possible that make anyone who isn't cis or heterosexual a second-class citizen. That includes women, too. You can be cis and heterosexual as a woman and still be seen as second-class garbage. Welcome to biblical marriage. And my family doesn't allow people to have differences of opinions. And if somehow you miraculously gain autonomy, informed consent, and education, they villainize it. My family villainizes secondary education. My oldest brother, who ironically was the only one who reached out after I deconstructed, him and his wife, my family and siblings, parents, villainize his education all the way up to getting a doctorate as why he's a progressive Christian, why he's a liberal, why he loves the rainbow people. That's not my words, that's what they said. I think calling people rainbow people is a slur because they never say it in a nice way. Education does not make you a conceited asshole, but it does keep women safer because the more educated you are as a woman, the more likelihood you will get divorced because you're with a loser. And same goes with men. The more educated you are, the less likely you're going to put up with a domestic abuser. Educated women consistently make better choices and are more liberal. But it's not because of their education. It's because they realize that most of the conservative bullshit is not based on statistics or actual documentation that can be backed up with science. And enmeshment is very, very common in conservative households. Enmeshment is one of the biggest pulls, draws, and threats that is combat compulsory heterosexuality. The desire to adhere to outdated stereotypes is a very straight version of enmeshment. The fear of being different, the fear of being excluded, the fear of being seen by your parents as an extension of themselves. You have to believe everything they do is why a lot of people are still in the closet. And that's just one reason. There are many reasons. Enmeshment is a way to control people and make them feel bad because you're being your own person. That's why gaslighting is so effective. You need to be autonomous. You need to have your own opinions. And I think a lot of my siblings do not see terrible parental behavior as abuse because the way they live their life is so similar to their parents. They don't see anything wrong with the bad behavior that was given to them. If you clutch and are devoted to things that are systematically hurting, oppressing, and viewing your gender as less than, you probably won't see it as abuse. If you have a relationship with a god or a religion or an idea, a philosophy that is causing you to live not your best life, you are basically loving the thing that's hurting you. And if you don't see it as something that's hurting you, it's hard for you to recognize trauma. And my sister, she invalidates my trauma because if I didn't experiences, she says, it didn't happen. If your parents take off the doors to your bedroom dozens of times for weeks at a time, this is child abuse. There is no reason to take the doors off your kids' bedrooms. You should be creating an environment of communication, positive reinforcement, green flag behavior that kids and teenagers feel comfortable opening up. That doesn't mean they're going to open up. But if teenagers know you're not going to judge them, control them, and they're not going to regret opening up because you're a safe place, they'll still always have that opportunity. And hopefully that continues even when they're an adult. I did not have a safe place to talk about difficult, uncomfortable things with my parents. If I was queer, trans, or confused, and when I mean confused, I mean just who am I? What is the purpose of life? I could not go to my parents because I don't think they would have understood. It's all about maintaining the facade and image of being straight, cis, and whatever it is you're supposed to be. And there's nothing wrong with being cis heterosexual. If that's who you are and you're not living a lie, that's perfectly fine. Just don't be boring about it, okay? Be who you are. And rock it. Just don't be boring. Choose individuality. Choose to be interesting, complex. Don't settle for a mediocre life because everyone around you would be more comfortable if you were straight, or more comfortable if you were Christian, or more comfortable if you identify as a woman because that's what ignorant people put on your birth certificate and believed you had no other choice. Be who you are and be so darn good at it. Nobody holds anything against you for being who you are because you're a decent human being. And I'm sure somebody out there will probably hold it against you because, let's be honest here, my parents were born in the 50s. They grew up a generation or two before queer rights was even a legality. 1969 was, I believe, Stonewall was in 1968, 1969? I should know this, but it's been so long since I've looked. Anyways, it wasn't until the late 60s that Stonewall was even a thing. So they were 13 or 14 before queer people were even consistently protesting, or at least in the big media eye. My parents were alive when it was illegal, a felony, to be gay. It was a crime for a woman to wear men's clothing. You could be arrested. They grew up during the most homophobic generation and decade of the 20th century. I don't think there is a more homophobic decade than the 1950s. They grew up in a time where everything was decided for you. Women were the property of men. Marital rape didn't exist. And women were extensions of men. And their only purpose as women back then was to give men a better life. Women were basically viewed as appliances. And men were their cords that couldn't work without being plugged in. That's basically what it is. And the sad part about all of it is they grew up during a time where being different was seen as a threat. That's why homosexuality, even in a lot of countries today, is villainized. They grew up during the generations that did not permit or view anyone different as a blessing. And if you weren't white, you were a threat without even breathing. They grew up in the same decade when Emmett Till was brutally murdered, which sparked the civil rights movement. Hate crimes were rampant. I'm not defending them. I'm saying they grew up during a time when being different could get you killed. They were systematically programmed to believe that being different was something to be avoided. And society at that time only permitted people to like different colors, different interests. As long as you conform to being a woman or a man, they would make certain allowances. They didn't grow up in an environment like now where anyone under 35 just probably doesn't assume you're straight or a woman just because you look like it. They didn't grow up in that environment. That is still not an excuse to force everyone to be something they're not. But I do have empathy for people who were born before 1968. The baby boomers. Well, baby boomers were 1946 to 1964. I do feel a lot of pity and compassion for people who grew up during generations where you couldn't be gay. You couldn't be a woman of your own autonomy. And luckily all my siblings were born from 79 to 94. Even then, I did not grow up in an environment or even a decade that embraced being different. At least not from a fundamentalist Christian viewpoint. Even today, you go to a Christian college, they're probably not going to accept you unless you look like Donald Trump, sound like Donald Trump, and have sex like Donald Trump. Hopefully not with the illegal part. It's still not acceptable in the circles I grew up in to be anything but a cookie cutter man or woman. And if you dare to like anything that isn't cis heterosexual and very sterile, and by sterile I'm not saying heterosexuality is sterile, I'm saying the worst parts of heterosexuality, or the only approved part of heterosexuality, it's sad. You can be heterosexual. 80% of the world is heterosexual, but you do not have to be the toxic versions, the boring versions, or the stereotype of what it is. Be who you are. Just don't be boring about it. And it's not wrong to be straight. It's only wrong if you view anything else as unnatural, inferior, not the default. That's when it becomes wrong. There's nothing wrong with being who you are, as long as it's legal and it's not hurting anybody. And whatever Trump is not legal. And I'm not talking about him being white or a man. Anything else about him is illegal. And hopefully it stays that way. We should not have to learn 30 years after our life starts that it's not okay that your parents didn't allow you to test the waters, learning about different religions and not being told that this religion is evil, this one sends you to hell, just learning about different things. It's sad. And when you grow up in an environment that erases everything that is not cis, heterosexual, and sterile, we are going to have a problem. A very big problem. 93% of suicides related to gender identity and sexuality would never happen. It would never enter the minds of young people to do it. If somebody in a position of authority, hopefully their parents and guardians, said it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to be confused, to want to learn what's going on, and if you're not straight, you're not confused. But it's okay to be confused about who you are as a person. Because your brain isn't fully developed until you're almost 30. It's okay to not know who you are. It's okay to be confused and figure out I'm bisexual. It's okay. I mean, I'm 32 and I'm still confused. It's just a part of being a human being. But confusion is not the same thing as going through a phase. Confusion can be a simple symptom of not having the education, the vocabulary, and the knowledge to make the right decisions or view yourself as a fully whole human being. And when you're told that therapy lures you to hell and that therapy can get you to stop believing in God, this is not the environment that prioritizes mental health, healing, and gaining knowledge so I can be my best self. If the only therapy you allow yourself is the religion in which you're a part of, you're not being sharpened. You're systematically being told the same thing, validating your thoughts. I want to be around people that challenge my point of views, positive and negatively. I want to be around individuals of all different walks of life. I want people to challenge the way I look at the world, how I view people, how I look at indigenous and minority individuals. I would not have gotten this far if people didn't challenge my previous way of thinking, which was extremely racist, homophobic, sexist, xenophobic. You name it, I was probably whatever that is. I wasn't a hateful person, but when you grow up in environments that do not allow anything to be different than the environment you're in, it will systematically create predators and people who just hate anyone who isn't white, cis, or straight. And male. Let's not forget that. It's sad that people have to wait until their 30s, like I did, to actually understand you're not going to hell because you're gay. There is no hell. Hell is something men of privilege created to make everyone get in line, shut up, and do what they're told. I would rather not have all the answers and be open to critical thinking and constantly changing what I believe based on scientific evidence than having all the fake answers, the wrong answers, living in a mythological fantasy and sleeping well at night. Ignorance is not bliss. I'd rather know everything than know a lot of nothing. And sure, when you've never been taught that critical thinking, thinking outside the box, being very different is one of the greatest parts about being a human being alive, free to make their own decisions. It's hard to be an autonomous person when you've been trained your entire life by religion and your parents to mistrust your gut. Because your gut isn't wrong. If your gut is telling you something, it's trying to warn you. It's usually your central nervous system or something in your body telling you something's wrong. And when your belief system sees women as second-class citizens and not to trust your body, this is an affront to bodily autonomy. Bodily autonomy is all about getting in touch with your body, your feelings, your opinions, your lack of education. It's or what you want or what you don't want, that is okay. That's part of being human. If everyone knew what they needed to know all the time and never had a loss or a shortage of that information, universities would be moot. I did not go to college because I did not know what I wanted to be. I wasn't allowed to know myself enough, to trust my gut enough, to know what I wanted to be. And the only thing I was good at was history, and you're not making 50 grand plus a year in history class, I'm pretty sure. So, if you don't allow yourself to trust your gut, stand up, advocate for yourself, you do not have bodily autonomy. You don't have healthy bodily autonomy if you can't say no and not give a reason why. You can give a reason, but you don't have to. You don't have to have a reason to get a divorce, leave the room, have a child, or not to have a child. You don't have to have a reason. Saying, I just don't want to is a good enough reason. You don't have to wait till someone is a horrible human being to divorce them. One of the best reasons you get divorced, I just don't want to be married anymore. That is a great reason. That's one of the reasons why I don't wear certain pieces of clothing. I just don't want to. I don't go to certain restaurants because it's not my taste. There's nothing wrong with them. I just don't want to. That is a good enough reason. Unfortunately, in the environment I was raised in, you aren't allowed to say no. Withholding anything is a sin. Imagine, only in religion can something be a sin that you alone own, you alone wield, and you alone have entire autonomy about. But if you don't give what is yours alone to somebody else that you don't have to, that's when it becomes a sin. Only in religion could something you don't have to give away be called a sin if you don't give it away. Yeah. The level of narcissism required to believe in religion is astounding. You cannot withhold sex, okay? Nobody's entitled to it. Nobody's entitled to your body. That's like telling a rapist, you can take what you want because I can't withhold it from you. No man, no woman, nobody who can have sex is entitled to anything that is attached to your head, your body, your spirit. Nobody's entitled to that unless you want them to touch you in some way. You cannot withhold sex. You cannot withhold your attention, your time. You do not owe anyone anything. Hopefully, in most relationships, you're honest, kind, and a decent human being, but you don't owe anyone anything. And if you grow up in an environment that sees sex, your attention, your body, your time, your life, your marriage as an entitlement, this environment probably covers up child assault, marital rape, and is not a safe place to be in. It's not. It may not be happening to everybody, but it's probably happening to half of the people in the pews. Safe places, safe people don't see themselves as entitled to whatever is on you or around you.